The Philadelphia Church of God presents the Trumpet Daily.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. The Prophet Ezekiel wrote his book as a warning to Israel, but anciently they had already been in captivity for over 100 years when the message was first delivered. Ezekiel's message was actually intended for the end time. It's still aimed at Israel primarily, the descendants of ancient Israel, but it's for our time today. Concerning these latter days, Ezekiel wrote about a watchman who is prophesied to be on the scene shortly before the return of Jesus Christ. Ezekiel's message holds the key to understanding who this watchman is and what his message is. Today's program spotlights a recent message my father taped for the Key of David. It's about God's end-time watchman and his warning message to Israel.
Greetings, everyone. The book of Ezekiel is a book of prophecy for this end time, and we have a booklet that will explain all of that to you. There's one chapter in the book of Ezekiel that talks about God's watchman, singular, not plural. There's only one that God prophesied would be on the scene in this end time, God's watchman. Now you know, and I know, there are many religious leaders that think, well, they probably fulfilled that role or that office. And of course, there are many followers that believe they do. So how can we distinguish God's watchman from the rest, from all of the others? Is there a way? Well, Ezekiel 33 tells us there absolutely is a way to tell one from the other. Very critical information that we must have to be able to do that. And it's very important because that watchman plays such a critical role in world events and world news in this end time. But can you separate God's watchman from the rest? Because God says He would command him to do certain things, and only this one watchman in the end time. Now, to this world, the watchman or God's watchman is a mystery. How many people do you read about or that know God's Word or something about God's Word? And how much do they talk about an Ezekiel watchman or God's watchman talked about in Ezekiel 33 and Ezekiel chapters 2 and 3 as well, but mainly chapter 33. Anciently, Israel went into captivity in 721 to 718 BC, and then Judah went into captivity over 100 years later in 604 to 585 BC, and Ezekiel was in that group of Judah. He was a slave in that group that was taken captive from Judah to Babylon. The first group of the Israelites, or Israel, went into Assyria as captives. So we have to remember when we're reading about this that Ezekiel was only able to take his message to the Jews because he was a slave in Babylon on the river Kibar. And if you read Ezekiel chapter 1, you'll see that God had this great vehicle, and He made a visit to the river Kibar and gave a vision to this slave Ezekiel. Now, Ezekiel was not a watchman, not in person anyhow. He was in his writing, but he was not a watchman. He was a prophet. And yet he writes his book to all of Israel, not just Judah, but to all of Israel, about a watchman coming on the scene in this end time. Now, what does that have to do with us? Of course, it's to Israel, and if you don't know who Israel is, of course, you can read our free booklet on the United States and Britain in Prophecy. and it will prove that to you. But here we have to see that Ezekiel was a prophet, and he was talking to the Jews when he was there, but he wrote his book to all of Israel, and yet Israel had already gone into captivity over 100 years before. That means that this is a book for Israel in the end time, and it states that throughout the book of Ezekiel. And our booklet certainly does prove that to you, as I said before. So today, God's people must deliver this Watchman message. God's very elect has to deliver this message, or Ezekiel will have written that book in vain, because it is for Israel in this end time. Now that is very, very critical information. And when you read through the book of Ezekiel, you'll see where the great cities are left without one inhabitant. So it has to be talking about a time when you have weapons of mass destruction, because nothing like that ever happened in Ezekiel's time. It didn't happen then at all. But it will in this modern world, and there's a lot of destruction talked about there. And if you want to know the future of the Middle East or Europe or America and Britain, or the Jews in the Middle East, Russia, China, all these great powers, then you will understand that by studying Ezekiel. And that is a critical book that you need to understand Bible prophecy. Now this is what I'm talking about really is something that ought to stir our minds, because it has everything to do with what's going on in this world today, even with the financial chaos we're seeing. That too was prophesied. And this book gets into very specific details about what is going to happen in this end time. And God's watchman would have a message from God to deliver to this world in this end time. Who is he? Where is he? When will he come on the scene? And our booklet on Ezekiel will answer all those questions for you. He wrote his prophecy for a watchman in this end time. He was never a watchman in person. He couldn't be. He was enslaved. He could not have been. But how can you know who God's watchman is? How can you know that? I mean, we have to know if we're going to understand what's going on in this end time, and especially in world news. Notice Ezekiel 33 and verse 3. I just want to show you that the word trumpet is mentioned there, and in verse 4, the trumpet is mentioned. Verse 5, trumpet is mentioned. And verse 6, it's also mentioned. Trumpet, the word trumpet. This is a message about warfare. When the trumpet was blown in ancient Israel, it was about warfare in most cases. It's the word trumpet is used again and again, and we have a monthly magazine that's called the Philadelphia Trumpet, because it is about the alarm of war. I mean, who in this world, if he really understands world conditions and he sees where all this is leading, all of these events are leading in the world, who among us could say, well, I don't see much chance of there being a war in the future? I mean, a person would almost have to be mad to see it that way. I mean, everything is leading to a crescendo, a super crisis right here in the end time. What does that have to do with you? Well, it has everything to do with you and to me and to all of us. But this is a warning work, and God says to that Ezekiel watchman, his own watchman, he says, either you get that message out there and you tell them about this message in Ezekiel, or their blood is on your head. If you don't have our monthly Trumpet magazine, the paper edition, then I tell you, you really do need it. You need it because it is a magazine which tries to give you a balanced view of what God is doing in this world and what's happening in this world. and give you a whole picture of what's going on. And you have a magazine where you can mark it, and you can make comments, and you can study it and go back and study it again and understand what is happening in this world, because God's watchman of all people should not be a mystery in this world. Right now, He needs to be understood, and this message really, really needs to be understood. What is more important than seeing a solution to all of these terrifying problems that we see in the world? And in our Trumpet magazine, you will see that there is hope. There is great hope in all this. In fact, you can go through Ezekiel and see in several places when God takes this world through the terrifying times of the end, the great tribulation and the day of the Lord, He's going to bring all those people to get to know God, to get to know Him. Can you believe that? Can you believe these terrible crises are actually leading this world into getting to know God? That's what it's all about. That isn't bad news, but there's some bad news because we won't listen to God now. We won't listen to His message now. And I'll show you that here in Ezekiel chapter 33. Notice verse 7. Verse 7 says, "So you, O son of man, I have set you a watchman. I, God, have done that." Watchman singular, "unto the house of Israel." Now Ezekiel wrote this. "Therefore you shall hear the word at my mouth and warn them from me." So the watchman gets his message from God's mouth. Do you mean to tell me that God actually speaks to this world today? Does He really talk to this world? Well, He certainly does through this Ezekiel watchman. He talks to the world. It's right from God's mouth. Now, this is a strong clue as to how you can know God's watchman. You can know who He is, where He is, and what He's all about. You can understand that. This word is not from the mouth of any man. It's from the mouth of God. That is the source. That ought to just send shivers up our spine. I mean, that's an amazing truth. It comes from the mouth of God, your Creator, the Creator of the universe and all that is. This watchman is singular, and yet you know there are others that talk about watchmen, different watchmen, and all that, but that's not the language of Ezekiel, and especially here in chapter 33, in verse 7. Now our Ezekiel booklet will fill in a lot of those details, but God's watchman and his supporters get this message out to the world from God's mouth. What does that mean to you? I mean, it says here, "You shall speak my words unto them." God commands that. He commands His watchman to speak these words, whether he wants to or not. Now, how much do you hear about that in this world? That's why it's such a mystery. You don't hear much about it at all. But where is this happening? Where God actually commands a man and says, "You shall speak my words unto them," not somebody else's, not another man's, but mine, God, my words. Well, that's what this work that he's talking about here is all about. And you must remember that Ezekiel wrote it, but he couldn't deliver it. Now today, God says somebody will be here in this end time delivering that message. He'll be here delivering that message. So what is this message all about? And do you know who God's watchman is? I mean, here's God commanding a man to do certain things and certain people to support him. And I mean, they know who God is and who God is using and all of that. They have to know that He's commanding all of this. And they get the message out to this world. Where is that happening? verses 8 and 9. When I say unto the wicked, O wicked man, you shall surely die, if you do not speak to warn the wicked from his way, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at your hand. In other words, you can go on and read the rest of it. God is saying, look, either deliver this message or their blood is on your head. We're guilty of blood. 8 times, if you read verses 3 through 9, God talks about warning Israel 8 times. That's a lot of times. Now God is very serious about this, and He keeps saying it over and over so we will get it, to deliver this message to Israel and of course the world as well, but not so directly. Where is that happening? And who is Israel? Well, again, who is the watchman? Who is God's very elect? Where is Ezekiel's message today? That God commands again and again that message be delivered. And you can see even from the context here that it is in this end time, the time we're living in today, when you can destroy whole great cities and leave not even one human being alive in that city. You know that has to be talking about today with all of these modern weapons of mass destruction. You know that. If you're honest, I think we all have to know that. But certainly Ezekiel warns about wars that are coming upon us. See, this is all about God's message, getting it out to the world. And in the 1990s, we had some of our lukewarm ministers saying, well, look, this message is too heavy-handed for this modern age or today's audience. But that isn't what Ezekiel says. God says, you'd better deliver this message. The very same message that comes from my mouth to this world. Or their blood will be on your head if you don't. You'll be guilty of what happens to them. And how horrifying is that? That's all to God's supporters and to the watchman. And he says, you either face that group or you face my wrath. And that's far worse. If you read Isaiah 56, it talks just in a few verses there about God's watchman that turned away, and they call themselves watchmen today. But he says it's like they're like a dog lying there on the porch of the house, and there are these fierce beasts all around the house of Israel. Like Europe and Russia and China and radical Islam. And God says the watchdog won't bark. It's like it's dead. It's not barking. It's not telling the people the truth from Ezekiel, which is for this end time. In fact, all of those prophetic books in the Old Testament are for this end time, as well as those in the New Testament. Well, I'll tell you this, you can look at Jeremiah 28 and verse 9. It says, when the word of the prophet comes to pass, you know God sent him. When it comes to pass, when the word of the prophet comes to pass, you know God sent him. Now we just send out a ton of literature from Herbert W. Armstrong, and all of that prophecy he talked about is coming to pass today. Was he a prophet? I mean, there's just we got all kinds of books and booklets to prove that to you, to prove it to you. Now, who was he? And who is the work who are those people that succeed him? Who are those people that get the work done? Notice verse 11, say unto them, as I live, says the eternal God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn you from your evil ways. For why will you die, O house of Israel? And now, of course, Israel doesn't think they're living in wickedness and evil ways, but they are. And you need to know who Israel is, and you need to know who everybody is out there. And the Ezekiel booklet will tell you most of that. itself. But God says, I want you to turn. I want you to turn. Who is out there telling people to turn from their evil way so they can escape what these awful prophecies that are going to be fulfilled and are being fulfilled even now? Who is doing that? Who is out there talking about this is really concerning the death of nations? How big and mighty and all-encompassing is that? Why will you die, O Israel? Can you answer that question? Do you know what it means? Do you really know what that means? Do I? Am I just a fraud? Do I know what it means? Well, only this Word of God will tell who's who. Only God's Word will do that. But this is all for the time we're living in right now, and we must know who God's watchman is. There is a lot of trouble coming, and it's going to bring the whole world to get to know God. Now, it really is a hope-filled message in that sense. And I want to show you why and how. Let's just put it this way. I want to show you how you can separate God's watchman from all the rest. Notice verse 30. Also, you son of man, the children of your people still are talking against you by the walls and in the doors of the houses, and speak one to another, every one to his brother. And I pray you hear what is the word that comes forth from the Lord. So they're talking actually not against you, but about you, about this message that's going out. That's what they're talking about. It is a message that's stirring some interest, and a lot of people are talking about it. Notice verse 31. Verse 31, and they come unto you as the people comes, and they sit before you as my people, and they hear your words, but they will not do them. They won't do them. Beware. They hear, but they won't do. Beware. That's a danger. Hear and not do. Is that me? Is that you? Who is this? Well, it has a lot to do with God's lukewarm people, I'll tell you that. For with their mouth they show much love, but their heart goes after their covetousness. They go right on living their same evil way, but they sit before God as His people. They like the message, but they don't like doing it. Most of them. It's not true of all of them. Verse 32, and lo, you are unto them as a very lovely song of one that has a pleasant voice and can play well on an instrument, for they hear your words, but they do them not. That's what Mr. Armstrong said about the people he came to in the early days. They loved to hear him preach, but they wouldn't do what he said. That's where it breaks down with most people. Did you know that? That's where it breaks down. That's where everything just goes on the way it always has been, instead of turning the way God says we must. Notice verse 33. Here is how you can tell the difference between God's watchmen and the others that claim to be doing that job. Verse 33, and when this comes to pass, lo, it will come, then shall they know that a prophet has been among them. They know that a prophet has been among them. They don't know that in the beginning, but in the end, they know that it was a prophet because what he said came to pass, as I said before from Jeremiah 28 and verse 9. Then they know after it all comes to pass, but it's too late physically if they wait until that happens. But see, this watchman is also a prophet. He is a prophet prophesying for God and the very message of God. And what does that mean to be a prophet? What does that mean? How does that set him apart in God's work? Well, God's message comes from His mouth. And if you understand the Bible, you're going to have to understand it, or understand a lot more than world news or even world history. You're going to have to understand something a lot more than other men who say they are watchmen. Notice Ephesians 3. I'll just quickly read this. Ephesians 3 and verse 3, how that by revelation He made known unto me the mystery. Verse 5, which in other ages was not made known unto the sons of men. It is, as it is now, revealed unto His holy apostles and prophets by the Spirit. So you see, you have to be a prophet or an apostle according to these verses or God won't reveal the truth to you. But this watchman had to be a prophet because God revealed His truth to him, and that's what sets him apart from everybody else. He comes with revelation, and he comes with revelation from God, and then all of those prophecies that he talks about come to pass. The problem is most people wait and say, well, I want to see if it really happens, and then it's too late physically. But nevertheless, it's all good news. It's revealed knowledge about God and how He is bringing this whole world to get to know Him. They don't know God. They think they know God, but they don't. That's why you have such violence and such hatred and such evil in this world. It's a horrifying world. It's a cauldron of violence and wickedness and every evil you can imagine. Because, well, we may hear God's message, but we won't do it. That's how God condemns most people. That's why we have to suffer. Otherwise, we wouldn't even have to suffer. Now, you can prove all this to yourself if you'll get our Ezekiel booklet. I'm telling you, you can prove every bit of it to you. And all of this, you see, this whole message is just filled with hope. It has all kinds of hope. If it's coming from God's mouth, you know there's hope there. The hope that everybody should want to hear. This is coming from God's mouth. This is God's message, it's His truth, and He's about to bring a conclusion to all of this evil and destroy the evil leaders of this world and get everybody ready for the return of Jesus Christ to this earth, who is going to sit on David's throne and rule this world for 1,000 years. And He's going to show them how to love each other. And He's going to destroy the way of war and violence and murder and drugs and suffering and all of these evils we see around us. What great hope there is in that message.
As you learned during the main message today, the prophet Ezekiel recorded a message for our day. He will have lived in vain if we fail to proclaim his message. This free booklet, Ezekiel, the End-Time Prophet, will help you understand this biblical book like never before. It reveals specific prophetic events that are happening right now in the United States, Britain, and many other English-speaking nations. Ezekiel also reveals that our nations are headed for the worst crisis ever to come upon mankind. But there is good news. This is all part of God's master plan for mankind. These terrifying events, now just ahead of us, will actually usher in the wonderful world tomorrow and the establishment of God's kingdom on this earth. The work of Herbert W. Armstrong prepared us for where we are right now. But now, unlike Mr. Armstrong's day, we actually see the sword rising in Europe. We know where it's all leading because of what Ezekiel prophesied. Request Ezekiel, the End-Time Prophet, and get to know the prophecies of God. In fact, when delving into this study, you'll actually get to know God better. God does reveal Himself in the book of Ezekiel. Getting to know the true God, in fact, is one of the dominant themes that you'll see in this book. So call the number on your screen and request Ezekiel, the End-Time Prophet. Also ask for this free reprint, God's Watchman. This is a great supplemental study to the booklet. Never has this world needed a prophet or a watchman more urgently than today. Never before have men lived in such frightening times. It's times like these that we must know where we are in Bible prophecy. Both of these publications will expound upon Ezekiel's message and show how it relates to our day today. So call the number on your screen and request the free literature, or visit us online at thetrumpetdaily.com to make your request. All of our literature is free of charge. We offer it without cost or obligation to you. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you again next week.